All right, I had to have Max Keiser back on because there's so many issues that he brings up, so many things he covers that are key, and I appreciate him coming on with us during Overdrive. And going back to Max Keiser joining us from Paris. Okay, Max, continue breaking down. You got into the opium wars. Recap that. Explain how important a world reserve currency is and how the international bankers based in the U.S. and England have been using this power to abuse everybody, take over the world. People are sick of it. But there's also a fissure, though, with inside the bankers. Some of them have been saying they want a new global currency or one stacked on top of the dollar because they've already hoarded out the dollar so bad. So navigating this, where do you see this going?
Yeah, well, first of all, you've been covering this idea of a global currency for quite some time, and you've had a lot of people on your show talking about it, and people have kind of pecked at it and looked at it and tried to come up with the story, and you've kept digging at it, and to your credit, because everybody else in the financial press has really been skirting and dodging this issue of a global currency. And, well, lo and behold, the Alex Jones show is pretty much correct on this one, because we do now have a global currency, and it's called the credit default swap. The credit default swap is a unit of fraud, and it is the basic unit of the global banking system today. It's a multi-$100 trillion market. It's issued by investment banks around the world, and it's used to transfer risk, which is ultimately collateralizing the global economy's risk, not reward or not substance or not anything tangible like gold bullion, but calculations which determine risk in various outcomes and events. That's the global currency today, and the credit default swap is the unit of that currency. It is a global currency. It's happening right now. And when we talk about recapitalizing the IMF and bringing in special drawing rights and putting in $1 trillion worth of additional funding, ultimately what that means is just rejiggering the books on all these big banks' balance sheets in terms of their credit default swap positions and how to take care of these positions and how to manage these positions. And we've gone from a fractional reserve banking system, Alex, to a negative reserve banking system. It's completely topsy-turvy and inside out. There is absolutely no there. If you go back to 2004, I remember Greenspan convinced the SEC to allow banks to increase their debt-to-capital ratios from 12 to 1 to 30 to 1, which was a huge jump in one single stroke of the pen. And that does not include the shadow banking system where all the credit default swaps are trading. If you include the credit default swaps into this law in 2004 from Greenspan, you're talking about a global banking reserve system that's based on a 1 to infinity. It's just completely, it's a fictitious, it's what Thomas Jefferson called fictitious currency. It's a notational value in a book. There's absolutely nothing behind it. And ultimately what this means is that there's going to be no more competition. And when you have no more competition, and when you have price fixing for the interest rates that are behind these fake currencies, you end up with a command and control economy, and you end up right back to where the Soviets were in the 1950s. No competition, command and control, price fixing, and indebtedness, and indentured servitude. And this is, unfortunately, the outcome of this is that competition, as that phrase is understood in America, is going to die.
Well, one of the British members of the European Parliament, this Hannon gentleman, he brought up the point to Gordon Brown a few weeks ago. He said you can repeat in that wooden apparatchik, like somebody from the Soviet era, that everything's fine as you spend, hundreds of billions more a month into the maw of the private banks. But reality, is going to basically overthrow you. And so where do you see this going? I mean, the bankers are acting like they're the saviors, but meanwhile, they're feeding the entire real economy, or what's left of it, into their derivatives to make sure they end up getting their money out, claiming they need trillions more to start the economy going, while they use the money to actually hoard everything.
Yeah, that's basically true. I mean, I take the long view, which is that if you go back to the 1350 period, during the feudalism, the only thing that gave rise to the middle class, the only thing that gave rise to the ability of non-nobility to negotiate a wage was the Black Plague in Europe, which wiped out virtually half the population. It was after the wipeout of half the population in Europe that you had the rise of the middle class, because all these lords needed now people to work on their estates, and they were willing to pay them a wage. That was the beginning of what we call the middle classes. This has been going on, but it's not that the nobility was happy about this. they're back and forth. The aristocrats and the nobility want everything back. They don't want a middle class. They don't want people with the social mobility. They don't want democracy. It's inconvenient for them. You know, in 1649, as I mentioned earlier, there was this idea, well, we got rid of the divine right of kings, which led then to 1694, the aristocracy came back with, let's introduce the Bank of England, which is put in place by the aristocrats in England to reestablish the place of the aristocrats after they had lost the battle of losing the divine right of kings in 1649. Then you had of course, you had the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and you had the history since then. We're at a period in time now where you've got this idea with the divine right of hedge funds. They believe that they're above, they're literally God's gift to planet Earth. They're completely above any law, and they're just, their value of money is what they say it is. You know, like we hear stories about the old medieval days, how many angels could dance on the head of a pin was an argument by priests. Now we've got Tim Geithner, the hedge fund, saying, well, how many credit default swaps can dance on the head of this pointless collateralized debt obligation? It's all nonsense. They're just talking out of their buttholes. There's no value there at all. They're just creating a total fictitious, what I call a financial hologram. It's just flickering images in the context of somebody's ledger, but there's nothing there. Unemployment is skyrocketing in America. There's no benefits left in America. People don't have any net worth. Their houses have been eviscerated. Well, where's the value? Where's people's wealth? What happened to it? It's been stolen. That's what happened to it.
Absolutely. Max Keiser, specifically, we're getting into Obama. We can see how this ends. The bankers are going to carry out their agenda. They're going to act like he was in power and try to fool the public into believing that this puppet, engineered all this. Meanwhile, the ruling class move on, putting a new puppet in who they will then, allow to take all the blame. Can you speak to that specifically, reaching out to Obama supporters who are supporting whatever the banks do right now, thinking that, that Obama is doing it to save them? Can you explain to them this betrayal, or how do you see that unfolding?
Well, I guess I'm lucky because I live in France, I live in Europe, and I'm a little bit 1 or 2 steps removed from the Obama phenomenon, but you see him on TV for 5 minutes, and he's an extraordinarily gifted guy in terms of his charisma, and so it's difficult to peel yourself away from that. But if you just look at the numbers and what's going on, as I mentioned with that case with the UBS and all these banks and the wholesale pilfering that's going on, you got to say, that guy might be a beautiful politician, but I'm starving to death. I got it. I'm living in a tent. I can't, this isn't a film. This is my life. And you got to, understand that there's the real, consequences to this financial oligarchy that's been allowed to run amok. And I still think that some kind of civil disobedience has got to be the way to go. I mean, obviously, the black community in America figured out that civil disobedience was the way to engineer some rights for themselves, and it worked out pretty well. They've got a black president. It's fantastic. And now what about community America as a whole doing some kind of collective civil disobedience to put pressure on this banking oligarchy to shift the balance of wealth back? Alex, all that money that was given to the banks, they could have very easily just wiped every credit card debit balance clean in America. It would have cost less money. People would have started spending immediately, and the economy would already be growing. What would have happened if it was growing? Then the banks, to deal with the growth, would have to raise interest rates, and they hate that. They hate raising interest rates because you can't steal money when interest rates are going higher. The best way to steal money is when interest rates are going lower. They could have totally wiped away every Visa and MasterCard debit in America. It would have cost less than they've spent so far, and people would be down in the mall spending right now. But then the economy would be growing, and they would have to raise interest rates, and that's not, banks don't like that. The neo-feudal banking class doesn't want higher interest rates.
So
they
Max
want people
Keiser,
making a return on their savings.
Max Keiser, any way you cut it then, and you write for the Huffington Post, and you tried to be a supporter of Obama. I mean, Bush was terrible. I mean, we would have thought he should have helped. I mean, bottom line, you're saying clearly after watching him several months in power and who he put in power and what he's doing, who does Obama work for? Where is he taking the country?
the numbers speak for themselves. I don't see, as long as Summers and Geithner are in the jobs that they're currently in, there's going to be no change, no progress. And when the President Obama talks about, we're getting a handle on this crisis and we're going to make sure we don't even repeat it again, the crisis hasn't even really started yet, because the real crisis begins when all these bailouts turn out to be that they don't work. Even today, the banks reported that we need another round of bailouts because all the bailouts so far didn't work. All the bank stocks were down again. And at the other side of this is going to be a tsunami of inflation, and that's the crisis. That's the crisis. This is just a warm-up.
Well, I mean, absolutely, you're right about that. Look, the establishment isn't stupid. You talk about this imperial hubris, the bankers engaging in all this looting and corruption.